So we are finishing a series that we've been in for 5 weeks. It's our 5th week in this series, all about faith. And I hope if you've missed any in this series that you will consider going online and watching some of them, because I've really loved talking about faith. And I want to show you again as we get started what Jesus made the promise of. He said, if you had faith, even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. And look at this last sentence, nothing would be impossible. The chances are, for all of you, there are certain things in your life that feel a little bit impossible today. And Jesus said, hey, listen, faith is the key to that. If you can learn how to apply faith to the things that feel impossible in your life today, you will get to see God work in your life. So I know I sound like a broken record, but I have some heroes in the faith, and one of my heroes of the faith is a guy I talk about all the time, George Mueller. My favorite faith story of all time comes from this man. So if you hear me talk about him all the time, I highly encourage you to read his biography or his books on prayer, because they're just amazing. And George Mueller lived in the 1800s in Bristol, England, and started orphanages to care for orphans without any money, just relied on God, and God provided. And so then when he got to the age of 70, I was thinking about this morning. At the age of 70, when most of us are thinking, okay, it's time to retire, time to slow down, he started this international speaking tour where he would go all over the globe talking about God and faith. So at the age of 70, he accepted an invitation to go and speak. He was in Bristol, England. He accepted an invitation to go speak in Quebec. So again, in the 1800s, if you're going to go from England to Quebec, you're getting on a slow boat across the ocean, right? So he was on this boat, and the captain tells a story of what happened. As they were crossing the ocean, they encountered fog that was so thick and it would not lift. As a matter of fact, the captain said he stood at the wheel, white-knuckled, for 22 straight hours because he was so scared. As a matter of fact, they could barely move at all because you just couldn't take the chance of running into anything, another ship coming, who knows what. And so they weren't making their scheduled time. And all of a sudden he said he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned around and it was George Mueller, who was a passenger on the ship. And George Mueller said to him, I've come to tell you that I must be in Quebec on Saturday afternoon. And the captain said, it's impossible. And George Mueller said, well, very well, if your ship can't take me, then God will find some other means of transportation for me. It's like, what was that going to be? Helicopters didn't exist. Submarines didn't exist. Was he going to ride a dolphin? We don't know. I mean, what did Mueller have in mind? But Mueller was so confident that God would take care of him. And so the captain, he said to the captain, I've never broken an engagement in 57 years. And the captain said, I'd gladly help you, but how can I? I'm helpless. And so George Mueller said to the captain, let's go down to the chart room and we're going to pray. And so the captain was a Christian. But he said, I thought to myself, what lunatic asylum could this man have escaped from? He's going to pray that the fog goes away? I mean, come on. And so the captain said to him, Mr. Mueller, do you not see how dense the fog is? And George Mueller said, no. He said, my eye is not on the density of the fog, but on the living God who controls every circumstance of my life. So they went down, and the captain was just stunned at the way George Mueller prayed. He got down on his knees, and he said he prayed a prayer that would suit a children's class, something like an 8 or 9-year-old child would pray, which is, by the way, if you know anything about Jesus and what he said we're supposed to develop this childlike faith. And Mueller basically said, oh, Lord, if it's consistent with your will, please remove the fog in 5 minutes. You know the engagement you made for me in Quebec on Saturday. I believe it's your will. The captain said when he had finished praying, I was about to pray, and then he said, I felt Mueller's hand on my shoulder, and he's like, no, don't pray. And he said two reasons why. First, you don't believe God will do it. And second, he said, I believe God has already done it, so there's no need for you to pray about it. And George Mueller said to the captain, Captain, I've known my God for 57 years, and there's never been a single day that I've failed to gain an audience with my king. So get up, open the door, and you'll find that the fog is gone. The captain got up, opened the door, and the fog was gone. And on Saturday, George Mueller was in Quebec. Now, needless to say, that transformed that captain's life. It totally changed his life when he experienced that for himself. And I would love to ask you, do you have faith like that? Do you have faith like that? The great thing about faith, and the reason we're doing this series, is I really want you to understand that faith is just like a muscle. None of you could turn around tomorrow and, bench press a truck, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen. Muscle doesn't just grow magically overnight. If you wanted to achieve some goal with strength, you'd have to work with it, right? You'd have to build that muscle up slowly. Same thing with faith. Faith is like a muscle, and it builds. And here's what I want you to understand why we've been doing 5 weeks on this subject. If you'll build the muscle of faith in your life, it will trigger the activity of God, and you'll start to see God solving problems that you can't solve. Do you have any of those in your life today? You got any problems that you can't solve? You'll start to see God providing and caring for your needs rather than you running around like a chicken with your head cut off trying to figure everything out yourself, making yourself anxious and worried and stressed. If you will build your faith and put a little bit of faith in God, you will start to see God rescuing people that we all love who are on destructive paths. They're on paths that are bad for them, and you will watch as God brings them off those paths because that's what he's capable of doing. I mean, that opening video, for those of you who are watching online, we showed a video at the start of the service of a man who was in a gang in L.A., arrested, faced 20 years in prison, and God transformed him into a pastor in Los Angeles. That's what our God does. Our God turns felons into pastors. That's what our God does. You will see him eliminating opposition and opening doors for us, because some of you right now, you feel blocked and you don't know the way forward in some key area of your life. And our God is more than willing to open doors. And so that's why it's all about faith. It's all about faith. It's all about faith. And we've been doing this series, which we're finishing today, Unsinkable, series on keeping your faith afloat. And I'm asking the same question I've been asking for the last 5 weeks. What do we have to do to build our faith? Would you please open your program? Inside, you'll find these notes. I want to ask you to grab the notes, grab a pen. There's some important things I'm going to ask you to be writing down as we go through this today. If you're watching online, welcome. Glad you've tuned in today. If you want to go to our website at pendlechurchlife.com, you can download these notes as well. And we're going to jump right into this. So last thing I want to say about this. The truth is, I could talk about this subject for the foreseeable future. I love the subject of faith. I love this. The truth is, my faith has grown during this series on faith. And I'm actually kind of sad that this series is going to be ending, but there are other things to talk about. So the last thing, and the only thing we're going to talk about today is this. If you want to see your faith grow, you want to turn this into muscle, then you have to obey even when it doesn't make sense to obey. You got to obey when it doesn't even make sense to obey. I read this story this week of a man who, when he was in college, he went to this large secular university, and he was a part of a campus ministry. And he said it was really small. There were only 10 people on this large campus that belonged to this ministry. And they had this grand idea one day. They said, why don't we do something huge to talk about our faith on this college campus? And so they planned this event. They rented the largest auditorium on campus. The largest auditorium on campus. They hired a local worship band, and they lined up this night of events to talk about Jesus, and they even planned to give away free hot dogs that night. How do you get the attention of college kids? Free food, right? And they had flyers and everything. They handed them out all over campus, and there was zero buzz. As a matter of fact, the day before the event, the team was sitting in the cafeteria planning the final details, and the leader was talking about how discouraged he was because he knew this was going to be a complete disaster. He'd seen things fail before. He knew this was on a path to fail, and so he was just prepping them. He said, listen, this is just going all the wrong way, and it's going to fail. And then all of a sudden, he heard a little commotion. He turned to his left, and one of the girls who was a part of his ministry stood up on top of the table in the cafeteria. He said, she's small, quiet, and shy, but she crawled up on top of the table in the cafeteria at a time when about 400 to 500 students were in the lunchroom eating lunch. And she stomped on her foot to get everyone's attention, or she stomped on the table to get everyone's attention. He said, yes, it was as awkward as you're all imagining it to be. And she said, I'm sorry to interrupt your lunch, but I want to invite you all to an event we're hosting tomorrow night in the campus theater. One of our friends is going to share his story about how he came to know Jesus and tell you how Jesus can change your life too. And we really want you all to be there because Jesus is the greatest thing in our lives. Please come. And then she started to sit down and said, oh, and by the way, there will be free hot dogs. And then she sat down. And we all stared at her. And she just sat down, started eating again. And he said, I finally leaned over and said, what was that all about? She said, I'm not sure. I just felt like the Spirit of God wanted me to do that. He said, I'm not saying that obeying God's Spirit means you start standing up on tables in public dining facilities. On a whole, he said, I'd counsel against it. But he said, I will tell you that the next night, more than 700 people showed up, and 51 college students made first-time decisions to follow Jesus that night. He said, God does his greatest works through small little acts of obedience, even when it means obeying when it doesn't make sense to obey. I couldn't agree more. I hope you've been catching what I've been trying to say about God in this whole series. I have been trying to say repeatedly that Christianity is not about some form or religion. It is about a real relationship with a living God. And if that's not what you have, then you don't have Christianity. It is about a real relationship with a living God. A friendship is the word he uses, and there are different levels to this. Matter of fact, I saw this in a book I was reading by an author named Dallas Willard, one of my favorite authors. And he talked about 4 different levels in which people live in their spiritual life, and I want you to ask what level you're at today. Blind faith, which is where a lot of Christians live. We believe that God is with us, but we're never aware of his presence, and we see no activity of God. If I were to ask you, tell me the last time you really saw God at work in your life, can you even name anything? The last time you saw him answer a prayer in a dramatic way, last time you heard from him. Most Christians live right there. It's like, yeah, I know he's there, but he has no real day-to-day interaction in my life. Then sometimes people go to level 2 where they become aware of his presence. Occasionally in a worship service or some powerful moment, they become aware that he's present, often of his presence, and often in nature. That will do it for people. It's like, oh my goodness, look how powerful he is, and we become aware of him. But it's just momentary and it doesn't last. But some move beyond into level 3, which is where they begin to see God at work, where you really see the results of God working in your life. And some of you can name stories of things that you've seen God do in your life right now and recently where you know it was God and because no one else could do it. And then this last one where you build this friendship with God. It's a personal God who communicates with you. I'll tell you with all my heart, I want this last level. That's the level I want to live at. Too many times I settle for the upper levels, but I don't want them. I want that. And all of this is rooted theologically in what Jesus said is true in our lives. Look at this. God is offering his personal friendship to all of us. That's what the offer of Christianity is. Personal friendship with God. Matter of fact, look what Paul wrote about in Ephesians. He said that so this is what Christ wants. He wants to make his home in your hearts through faith. Many times you'll read articles online if you read about on Christian websites that are, stop telling people to ask Jesus in your heart. Why? That's where he says he wants to go. He wants to make his home in your heart. It's individual and personal. And it's not a picture or a statue of Jesus that wants to do this. It is a person. It's God himself. And because he's God, he's omnipresent, which means he can be everywhere at once. He can be in my heart and your heart at the same time and in the same way. And that's the offer from God. It's personal. Personal relationship with God where he's made his home in your heart. But more than that, he also offers all of us a brand new role in our life, and it's the role of shepherd. So if you've ever been to a funeral in Psalm 23:1, you've heard this verse read. Psalm 23:1, the Lord is my shepherd. That's the offer from God. God is saying, I will be a shepherd and you can be my sheep. Now that means nothing to us because I don't know if any of you, I doubt if any of you have ever owned sheep, but if you ever owned sheep, you understand that what he's offering. This is all about the relationship that a shepherd has. The only thing, the dynamic about this relationship is that shepherds guide sheep by speaking. Did you know that? That's how this works. You literally, you can see this now. I thought I had a slide, but I don't. In the Middle East, when there are people bringing in their shepherds who bring their flocks into the market, you can have streets full of different flocks of sheep, and they're all on the same street. And if I saw it, remember the first time I saw it, I'm like, wait a second, how do you keep them separate? And shepherds never worry about it. You know why? Because sheep know the voice of their shepherd. and they will only follow the voice of their shepherd. So that's where you can see this today around the globe, where they bring their sheep into market, and they're just massive amounts of sheep on the streets, and the shepherds aren't worried in the least, because the moment they call out to their sheep, the sheep will follow their voice only. That's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, I will be your shepherd, and you will learn my voice and follow me. Jesus reiterated in the New Testament, he said, my sheep hear my voice, and they will only follow my voice. That's the offer of God. God comes to personally come and live inside of us, and we learn to hear his voice, and he communicates to us in two main ways that we've talked about in this series. First are what we call inner promptings. It's where God communicates his will to us internally. Dallas Willard, that author I mentioned earlier, talks about promptings from God coming in a variety of ways, either whispers or ideas or visions or sounds or dreams or circumstances, and through other people, just to name a few of the ways in which God will communicate what he wants for your life. And then obviously the key one is the Bible. If you read your Bible, you will hear from God again and again and again what he wants for your life. So let me give an example, because this is where obedience comes in. If you understand this and accept this, that God wants this new relationship with you, where you can learn to hear his voice, and he will begin to show you what he wants for your life, then obedience comes into play. So a little bit ago in this series, one Sunday morning, I was super excited to see some good friends of mine who came to church and surprised me that day. They live far away. And I was so happy to see them, and when they came in. And after the service, we were standing up toward the front here talking, and the wife started talking about this horrible thing that was happening in their family. This awful situation where this husband was pretty much out of the picture now. He was headed for serious, serious trouble, and this relative, this woman, was about to be a single mom for a very, very long time, maybe permanently. And my heart was just breaking as I was listening to the story. And whatever we talked about that Sunday, they'd really felt like God was asking them on their way back home to go way out of the way, stop by, and see this family. And they were going to take some of the free meals that we offer, and they were going to go serve. And as I was standing there listening to them, clear as day in my mind, I heard something. So that morning, early that morning when I was in here prepping early, a friend of mine in the church, I'd done something recently for this family, and so this person came in and gave me an envelope. And it had a card inside, and I knew there was going to be some money in there. Didn't know what it was, and obviously I just put it in my computer bag for later and didn't think anything of it. Until that moment, listening to that story, I heard clear as day in my mind, open the envelope and give all that's inside to them for this woman. And so I just bent down and reached into the bag where that envelope was. I just opened it, and I had no idea what was in there. Nothing at all. No idea. And I opened it up, and there was a really generous gift. And so I took it out, and I just handed it to my friend, and I said, I want you to give this to him. They didn't want to take it. And it's like, it's not yours to refuse. And I have no idea how that impacted that person. None at all. Never heard. Not my story. My part, it's not about me. It was about me being willing to obey with what God had put in my hands in that moment. Now, if you begin to follow Jesus like this, he will begin to direct you like this. And he will at times ask you to give stuff away and serve someone and say something to someone. He may direct you to stand up on a cafeteria table in the middle of a college and shout to everybody about free hot dogs and come hear about Jesus. Probably not that one. But he's going to give you directions that are at times hard to follow, and you won't do it unless you believe something. And this is what I believe to the core of who I am. I believe I will experience God when I obey. And you won't experience him if you don't obey, by the way. You won't. He will prompt you, and if you say no, then you will live that level 1 Christianity where you intellectually know that he's real, but you never experience his love in your life. I want that, like I told you. If you read the stories of Jesus at all, you will see this for yourself. One of my favorite stories of Jesus is one time he was with his disciples. They went out to this remote place in the middle of nowhere, and the crowds just followed them out there. We know that there were about 5,000 men, not counting women and children, so anywhere from 8 to 10,000 people were out in the middle of nowhere listening to Jesus. And as the day was getting late, the disciples were watching the sunset. They saw these people. They're in the middle of nowhere. Nowhere. And they practically say to Jesus, hey, this is a remote place. It's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the nearby farms and villages and buy something to eat. So sounds very reasonable, right? Send them all away so they can go buy some food because they're going to starve. If we need to get them some food. And Jesus gives them a command to obey that makes absolutely no sense. Some of you know what he said to them. He says to them, you feed them. So think of it this way. Let's say that you get free tickets to the Kohl Center in Madison. You ever been inside the Kohl Center or ever watched an event on the Kohl Center? It's huge. And let's say that you go to the Kohl Center and you're standing in the Kohl Center and God says to you, I want you to feed all the people in here for free. How are you going to react? How are you going to feel? You're going to say, my credit card will be smoking and on fire. There's no way I can feed this many people, right? That's what you're going to be thinking. Impossible, God. And impossible is sometimes right where he wants us, by the way. Did you know that? Some of you are at a spot where it's impossible. And not because he hates you, but because he loves you and wants to meet your need when you turn to him. So they say to Jesus, impossible. We cannot do it. We don't have enough. And he says, well, what do you have? And so they gather their meager supplies together. They got five loaves of bread and 2 fish. So Jesus, if you know the story, he takes the loaves of bread, he breaks them in half, and he gives thanks to God. So now he's got 10 pieces of bread and 2 fish. So 12 pieces of food. How many disciples did Jesus have? 12. One little piece of food for every one of his disciples, and he hands it out. And he says, go feed them. Can you imagine, what are you thinking if you're his disciple? You're like, the Kohl Center, right? The Kohl Center. Right? You're thinking, this is insane. And obedience means obeying when it doesn't even make sense to obey. And they turn around and they distribute the food, and then they sit back and they think, in 5 seconds, this picnic is over. Because it's not making past the front row, right? And to their absolute surprise, because God makes food and makes stars and solar systems and universes, he just makes this food multiply and multiply and multiply. And 5,000 men, not counting women and children, were fed that day. And not just a little nibble and pass it on, but full. And they gathered more, way more, than what they had ever given out. And all of their faith grew that day, because you only experience God when you obey when it doesn't make sense to obey. You've got to obey even when it doesn't make sense to obey in order to experience God. So my big question for you is this. Is there anything I'm aware of that I know God wants me to do? Is there anything I'm aware of today that I know God wants me to do? That's what you got to be thinking about. Because as God has offered to be shepherd in our life, and that's about learning to listen to him and be guided by him. So there are a couple of things I've encountered in my life that can really throw off my experience with God. I'm only going to talk about the second one. Jump down to letter B on your notes. This is the one that trips me up the most, so I just wanted this to be my focus. Not even trying to listen. This is the big one. It's easy, I don't know how many of you feel like you just have so much free time, you just don't even know how to fill it. I don't know how many of you are just like, I'm bored all the time. It's so boring. My life is so boring. I never have anything to do. All I do is watch TV all day long, right? Now, probably not talking to too many of you. Most of you feel like this half the time, right? The world we live in is crazy busy and super loud, and there's always something clamoring for our attention. I mean, we have to tell you to silence your phones because your phones are going to go off during the service, right? Because somebody always wants to get a hold of you, and somebody always wants to talk to you or text you or email you something or sell you something, right? And it's going off all the time, constantly, attention. And I don't know about you, but what happens to me is that I can find myself at the end of the day just boggled by everything I've gone through and thinking, oh my goodness, I never even thought about God today. Does that happen to anyone else? Happens to me. It just happens to me, where all of a sudden I'm not listening. I'm like the sheep that's wandered away from the shepherd, and I'm not even trying to listen to what he may want from my life. And then you get everything that you can deliver in your life. Away from him, you get only what you can deliver, and I don't want that. So the key to me is this: learning how to turn my mind back to God during the day, constantly. Constantly turning my mind back to God during the day. And there's so many verses I could show you about this. This is one of my favorites, though. Colossians chapter 3, verse 2. Look at this verse. Set your mind on things, on earthly things, not on things above. Okay? So look at that verse. Does that seem right? Not quite right, is it? It's what we do, right? And I have a typo in there, dang it. Set your mind on earthly things, not on things above. That's what it's like in this world. The world's constantly telling us to set your mind on what you're going to buy this Friday, right? What you're going to buy on Cyber Monday. Set your mind on earthly things, not on things above. There will be way more attention given to shopping this week than Jesus, right? I'm not lying. It'll be hard to keep him in our mind in the world that is as crazy busy as ours. But that's not what the verse actually says. By the way, you can always know when you're doing this. Well, if you've set your mind on earthly things, not on things above, you will always know it because you will have wonderful things like anxiety, discouragement, fear. You'll have this desire to run away and give in to something that's going to numb how you're feeling when you have set your mind on earthly things. And Paul actually said this: no, I want you to set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. And look at the intentionality of this. This is a command. It means we have some say over whether or not we're going to do it. So here are the two things I do to set my mind on things above. And this is what I have loved about this series. So what's happened to me during this series is I kind of really had drifted away from these practices a little bit. And during this series, I just got pulled back into what I know I should be doing. And the impact to my life spiritually has been dramatic. So these are the two things I know. Start your day 15 minutes earlier. Just get up earlier than you would normally get up. I get up a little earlier than 15 minutes. And then on the back are these notebooks. And if you're watching online and you want one of these, just email us. We can send you one. Inside cover is this. And by the way, we handed these out a few weeks ago. If you picked up one of these, I totally redid this whole sheet yesterday. And I made extra copies, tons of them. So just grab one on your way out if you picked up a notebook recently. If not, this is for you today. On the front, it will tell you how to read your Bible and get something out of it. Because so many times you're like, I don't know what to do. So that's what this whole side is about. Because you got to let him communicate with you. And he will communicate with you so clearly through the Bible. And then on the back side is how to pray in a way that's meaningful. And again, it takes about 15 minutes when you're getting into this habit. And so for me, it's different. I've been doing this for a long, long time. My time is more than 15 minutes. And I had been truthfully letting work encroach on my time so that this just wasn't as important. And this series really reminded me of this is really everything. This is everything. I'm going to stop working someday, but I will never be out of a relationship with God, ever. So I reprioritized this. And it has transformed so many things. So I want you to take one of these on the way out, either the sheet if you got one, or take the notebook too, whatever you want. This will help you. But then the second thing that I want to encourage you to do is something I've talked about, and not for a while, and it's use GPS to interact with God all day long. So if you flip your notes over on the back, I put how I do this GPS experiment. And this has just been a habit in my life for 15 years. I absolutely love this. Here's the summary of it up on this slide. You can read that later. But you set 3 to 5 alarms on your phone, because what's going to happen is, what happens to me, and this is essential, is that I spend that time alone with God, and then I go, and the demands of my job are constant and changing all the time, and they're really, really urgent, and I forget about God. And remember the command, set your mind on things above. And I need something during the day to pull me back to God. So GPS does it for me. I don't care if you have something better, let me know. But I set alarms on my phone to go off, and usually like mid-morning, right around lunchtime, right in the early afternoon, and then the evening. And again, I'm setting my mind, when that alarm goes off, I do 3 things. And it's simple. I can do this really quickly. Once you learn it, it's not hard to do. You say, God, you picture that God is asking me, what do you need from me right now? I want you to picture God on his throne saying to you, what do you need? What do you need from me right now? We tend to have the wrong view of our needs. We tend to view our needs as a sign that God hates us, that God has abandoned us, God has forgotten us. And the reality is, needs are the best opportunity to experience the love of God if you will bring those needs to him and say, God, I need this from you. And so all day long, I'm turning my attention back to God and saying, here's what I need from you right now. I need wisdom, or I need patience. I pray the patience one a lot, so I need patience, right? I need help. Some of you, the honest prayer you would be praying all day long is, I could use some financial help. I'm stuck. I don't know how to move forward. I need your help. Guide me, right? That's what shepherds do, by the way. They guide. So picture God is saying, what do you need from me right now? And just tell him what you need, and then remind him that you're here to do his will. Jesus taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And that's what I do, is constantly during the day, I'm setting my mind back on him, saying, your will be done, not mine. Because my body fights this. I'm an activist, a forward motion guy, and I have to constantly bring my will back to him and say, your will, not mine. Your will, not mine. Your will, not mine. And then the last one stands for serve. Who do you want me to serve in your name at this moment? Because I'll tell you this. One of the things that is so broken about our world is that we are so incredibly focused on ourselves all the time. All the time. And I can tell you right now, the greatest way to destroy your life is to make it about you. Guaranteed. You want to destroy your life, make it about you. God didn't create you to make it about you. He put you here on earth to serve in some way in this world. That's why we give you all these serving opportunities constantly as a church. Because you're going to encounter something that really connects with your heart, and that's where God wants you to serve. And so until you discover that, keep getting involved. Say yes to every serving opportunity that comes your way. Because you were made to serve. Jesus said we are supposed to be like him, and he was a servant in this world. So this is what I do. So really simple, right? I get up earlier than I need to. I spend this time reading my Bible so I can listen for him and then talking to him through prayer, because I want that relationship to be priority, and then cycle back to him during the day. Now, I know that many of you, it's been a while since you've had any kind of experience with God where you felt like he was really communicating with you. So we wanted to give you an opportunity to experience it for yourself today. So here's what we have. Could I have a couple of volunteers come forward? I need at least 2 volunteers come forward. Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, so just everyone gets 1. Sorry for those of you watching online. Nothing I can do. Apologize. But they're all getting an envelope. Every single person in the room is getting an envelope today. And inside 10 of these envelopes is a $100 bill. Inside 20 of these envelopes is $50. Inside 5 are $40, and inside 20 are $30. So, and the kids get them too. Okay, so you can go ahead and open it up, and you can look and see what you have. And here are the rules. Thank you. So here are the rules. Some of you have done this before. You've been in a service where we did this, so you already know the rules. The rules are this. It's not yours. Rule number 1, most important rule. It's not yours. Rule number 2, you have to pray and say, God, ask God who he wants you to serve with this gift. Okay? So I remember last time we did this, a bunch of my family was here, and one of them got one of the big ones, and we went out to eat afterwards, and this poor waitress was so frazzled that day. All of us took all of ours and left her the biggest tip she has ever gotten. She still smiles when we come into the restaurant. It's like, I can't do that every time, right? But isn't that, it is the joy you feel. I mean, we're all just like, want to walk slowly out the door just to see, right? Because there's so much joy in giving. So much joy. There's way more joy, by the way, in giving than you'll ever get in getting. So you just pray. And by the way, you know what you're doing when you're doing this? You're listening for God. You're listening for God. God, this isn't mine, it's yours. Who do you want me to serve with this gift? And then obey, even if it doesn't make sense. Some of you are going to feel, I've been doing this now for years. I've been a part of churches. I've done this probably for 10 or 12 years now. I know what happens. Some of you are going to pray, and you're going to really feel like God is asking you to add something more to it. And you're going to take this and do even more with it. I know that happens. Or you're going to combine it and tell other people about it, and the stories that come out of this are so cool. But you obey, even if it doesn't make sense. So sometimes it's like, it doesn't make sense why God would want me to give to this. It doesn't have to. And by the way, many times you never know the outcome of the story. That's okay. It's not about you. It's about us being obedient with what God has given us, even when it doesn't make sense to do it. And then the last thing is, let me know whatever God prompts you to do with this gift. And there's no time limit on that, okay? So if you carry this thing for the next 6 months, that's okay. But you just keep it in a way so that you remember what it is. So if you want to keep it in the envelope, and every time you see that envelope, just do one thing, okay? Pray, God, who do you want me to give this to? And you will start to listen for God. So I've done this so many times over the years. I know the stories that will come back. Some of you are about to have the greatest adventure with God you've ever had in your life. And you are going to write and tell me about stories where you heard from God. Because I know that's what happens. Some of you are going to pray more with this envelope than you have prayed in the last 6 months. Because it's not yours, right? It's His. And you're about to have an amazing experience with God. So my email address is just my name, brianrudesill@gmail.com. Send me your stories. Some of you, you're gonna give it away this week because you're gonna have the opportunity, and God is gonna clearly communicate with you. This is where it goes. Some of you, you're gonna hold on to it for months. That's okay. There's nothing right or wrong about this. The point is that you're praying and listening for Him. That's the point. Listen, all of this only works. It only works when you let Jesus Christ do what He said in that verse in Ephesians, make His home in your heart. That's it. If this is still about religion for you and God is just this distant figure, this word in your vocabulary, and you don't really say that you know Him, then this won't work. Nothing will work. He wants to make His home inside of you. He's offering you His hand of friendship. And the proof of that is what He did when He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, 2,000 years ago. We're about to celebrate Christmas when we remember His entrance into this world. What was taking place is that God Himself had God the Son had left His throne and entered into this world. And He willingly would lay down His life on a cross for all of us. Because the problem isn't that there is evil out there in this world. The problem is the capacity for evil is right here. It's in the heart of every human being. We've all done unloving things, just a staggering amount of them. And Jesus bled and died on a cross for those. Let me have you bow your heads. This living God who gave His life on a cross for all of us and rose again will hear you if you pray to Him. He is a real God. And your friendship, by the way, has been on His mind since the moment you were born. He has been pursuing you every moment of your life because He loves you. He just loves you with an unbreakable, unconditional love, and He wants so badly to have you in His family and to be your friend. And if you want Him, here's what you say. You say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I want friendship. That verse said that you want to make your home in my heart, so I offer you my heart today. Make your home inside of me today. Forgive me for the unloving things I've done in my life. and let me get to know you better. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish up today, can I ask you all to grab this connection card out of the program? If you just prayed and asked Jesus to forgive you or renewed your commitment, just let us know what you've done. There's a couple of boxes you can check, but maybe some of you have some things you really want us to pray about. Listen, we believe in the power of prayer, and there are a whole team of people that will pray for you. So if that's what you need today, just let us know, and then just drop it in one of the 2 offering boxes. Other than that, take your envelope and go have an adventure with God this week. Thanks so much for coming. Hope to see you again next week.